The streets of Forest Hills, Queens, never felt empty. Even in the dead of night, the air buzzed with a lingering hum. Subway rumbles beneath the pavement, flickering neon signs from delis still open at ungodly hours, and the distant sound of a siren screaming through the borough. It seemed like just another normal day in Queens. But that night, something changed. It started on a rain-slicked corner of Austin Street and 71st Avenue, outside an old diner that smelled like burnt coffee and fried onions. That was where Raymond Holt met his end. But it wasn't the end. Not for him. Not for them. Raymond was a nobody. Just another guy trying to scrape by in a city that didn't give a damn about nobodies. A dishwasher at a greasy spoon. No family, no future. Just debt, and the weight of a city pressing down on him like an iron hand. That night he'd just finished his shift. He pulled up the hood of his jacket and lit a cigarette, standing beneath the buzzing yellow streetlight. That's when he saw them. The cops. 2 officers leaning against a patrol car, eyes locked on him like they were hunting something for sport. "Yo!" Officer Riggs called out. Raymond ignored him and started walking. But the footsteps behind him quickened. "Hey!" I said. A hand clamped onto Raymond's shoulder, yanking him back. "You deaf, buddy?" Raymond barely got a word out before the first punch knocked the cigarette from his lips. The second one took him to the ground. The cops bursted out, laughing. They beat him like he was less than human. The last thing Raymond saw before everything went dark was a single black rat crawling from a sewer grate, watching him with glowing red eyes. The cops left Raymond on the floor behind the diner, a bag of trash left to rot in the shadows. Nobody called an ambulance, nobody reported it. The city swallowed him whole. For 3 days, Raymond Holt laid in the gutter, the rain pooling around him, mixing his blood with the filth of Forest Hills. The rats came first, then the crows, and then... He opened his eyes. A shuddering breath wheezed from his throat. His ribs felt wrong, like something was slithering beneath his skin. He reached up and touched his face, cold, stiff. But he wasn't dead. He was something else. A deep, gnawing hunger burned inside him, a hunger that wasn't human. Then he heard it, the ticking of a patrol car's engine cooling in the distance. Raymond got up and started walking. By morning, Forest Hills had changed. The bodies of Officer Riggs and a bartender were found torn apart in a bar off Queens Boulevard. But Riggs didn't stay dead for long. By afternoon, he was walking. By nightfall, so were dozens of others. The dead came from alleys, from gutters, from shallow graves the city had forgotten. The zombies walked with empty eyes and gnashing teeth, devouring anyone foolish enough to step into the dark. Officer Delgado from the 112 precinct had been on the force for 10 years. He'd seen gang violence, drug busts gone wrong, and the occasional psycho with a knife. But this was different. The first call came in around 6:45 a.m., a mutilated body found outside a coffee shop. By noon, there were 6 more. By sundown, entire streets were going dark. Then the static started. One by one, radio calls cut out. The last message from dispatch had been barely audible. "Containment has failed. Get out while you can." And then, silence. Delgado watched from the rooftop of the precinct as a swarm of bodies moved like a tide down Queens Boulevard. This wasn't a riot. It was an invasion. Maggie Tran, a local news reporter, had been covering New York for 5 years. She thought she'd seen everything. Then she saw Raymond Holt. He was outside a laundromat. He stood under a broken streetlight, watching her. His clothes were still torn from the night of his beating, his face half decayed. Her camera crew was already dead, eaten. But Maggie had something they didn't, a live broadcast. "If anyone is out there," she whispered into the camera, "Forest Hills is gone. They're everywhere." She turned the camera back to the street. Raymond lifted his head, his mouth twisted into a grin. And then he charged. Then appeared Jonathan, a survivor who happened to witness what was going on. Jonathan gripped Maggie's wrist, dragging her through the subway steps. The 7 train had stopped hours ago. The empty cars were now nothing more than steel coffins. "We need to get to the bridge," he panted. "We have to get out of Queens," Maggie sobbed. "It's too late, Jonathan. They're everywhere." A low growl echoed in the tunnel behind them. Jonathan turned around. A figure shambled toward them in the darkness, dragging something wet and heavy behind it. The tunnel lights flickered. Raymond Holt appeared, and he grinned. Somewhere in an abandoned police station, a single radio transmission crackled through the static. "This is Officer Delgado. Queens is swarming with zombies. If anyone is out there, do not enter the subways. I repeat, do not enter." A wet, gurgling scream came from the radio transmission, some static, and then Raymond responded and said, "I'm coming for you. Run."